To join us today. We have a number of different panelists. I am Cristina Giannopapa. I'm Women in Aerospace Europe Chair, and I would like to tell you a little bit, for those of you that are not so much aware about WIA, that the vision of WIA is a successful European aerospace sector with inclusive representation at all levels. Over the years, we have been expanding. We have become a family. We have grown quite a lot, a network, a platform for the aerospace profession, and our target is to promote diversity and excellence, and of course to help the aerospace professionals and their organizations. And today we will have the pleasure to have with us different representatives to talk to you. Also, it is there to attract the younger generation to engage into the aerospace sector. This is something very dear to my heart, the promotion of the STEM profession. And I welcome you all, and I wish you a successful panel, and looking forward to hear the different views and ideas.
Thanks so much, Christina. And welcome everyone to the panel. My name is Heidi Thiemann. I'm the Director of the Space Skills Alliance, and I'm going to be kind of part chairing and part being involved in discussion with a whole range of other amazing people who work in the skills field in space and aerospace across Europe. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly, just say name, job title, and where they work for, and then we're going to be going into some set questions that we've got prepared. But I'd encourage audience members watching, please do take part in the discussion. You can say where you are from the chat, you can say hello, you can kind of talk about some of the things that we talk about in the chat too, but also please do ask questions, because what we want to hear from you is some of your questions so we can discuss them further down the line. So I'm going to kick off by asking each panelist to say who they are, where they're from, their job title, and then we'll move into some questions. So Vera, I think we will start with you.
Hi, hello everyone, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Vera Pinto. I'm the Equality and Policy Coordinator at the Director General for Defense Industry and Space in the European Commission.
Thank you, that's brilliant. And Lucy.
Hi, thank you, Heidi. So my name is Lucy van der Tas, and I am the Head of Talent Acquisition at the European Space Agency, and I'm based in the Netherlands.
Brilliant. And Christie next.
Hi, my name is Christie Maddock. I'm an Associate Professor at the University of Strathclyde up in Glasgow in Scotland.
Thank you very much. And Ioannis.
Yes, thank you. My name is Ioannis Lentas. I am a human resource expert. I work for the EUSPA, for the European Union Space Programme Agency in Prague. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we've got a really great panel of experts today. So I'm going to kick off with the first question, really, and I'm going to give it to a specific person. I'm going to give it to Vera, but it's the European Year of Skills, and we know that we need to future-proof skills, especially in space and aerospace. So this year, being the European Year of Skills, can you tell us about some of the initiatives that the Year of Skills is kind of leading on or asking for, and just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Indeed, the Year of Skills kicked off, the European Year of Skills kicked off on 9th of May. The 9th of May is the Europe Day, and it will last until 8th of May of 2024. And of course, the general objective of this year is to boost the efforts to promote a mindset of upskilling and reskilling for the labor market. And so what was agreed among Commission, European Parliament, European Council, Member States and the stakeholders would be that this year would be dedicated to promote an increase and a more effective and inclusive investment into training and upskilling. We want to strengthen the relevance of skills. We want to match people's aspirations and the skill set with the labor market opportunities, especially when we are talking about the green transition, the digital transition. And of course, we also want to attract more people from third countries with skills that are needed also in the Union. And so this is a very ambitious, and in space in particular, actually on 25 of April, so just a few weeks ago, with the support of the European Commission and DG DEFI in particular, it was announced and launched a large-scale skills partnership for the space sector dedicated to data services and applications. So the aim is to empower workers, so the workforce, with the skills needed to the development of the future innovations and to achieve the aims also on the recent announced EU space strategy for security and defense. So this partnership is actually very important. It builds up already in an existing and more large partnership, skills partnership in the space sector in Europe. And this one in particular is very special and dear to me, because one of the objectives that this particular partnership will pursue is to have an equal and inclusive access to training, to activate more people, to attract them also to the space sector labor market across the different value chains. So we are talking really about everything, and we want to, in particular, to foster gender equality and attract new talents to the present and emerging and future space geospatial professions. So this is very ambitious. It's just starting now. And it will, of course, this partnership is committed to help and guide learners in their skilling, upskilling, reskilling efforts, and support them to have an access quality training. So there will be continuous exchange and cooperation among stakeholders from academic, private, public sectors on skills development and requirements. It will also encourage citizen science practices and hands-on activities. And again, the overall aim of this partnership is to enhance the value of the space, downstream, and geoinformation applications in every aspect of life, while attracting new talents to the current space professions.
Brilliant. No, that's a great summary. Thank you so much, Vera. Now, before we kind of get into some of the other questions around skills and how it all links back to the European Year of Skills, I think it's kind of important for maybe the panelists to share what do we mean when we say skills and space skills and aerospace skills? So I'm going to throw that question to each of them and say, what comes to mind when I ask you what are space and aerospace skills? I'm going to start with Christie first.
Brilliant. So a skill at the base is the ability to do something well. And then in particular, it's a skill, an ability or trait that you are trained to do. Okay, so not innate. Then there's sort of core programmatic ones like project management, time management, leadership. There's, especially in STEM, technical skills and behavioral, so cross-functional. Within the technical, at a more pragmatic level, from an academic, there's sort of a disciplinary knowledge, fundamentals of physics, the fundamentals of maths, okay, that foundation knowledge. And then there's the ability to use, say, a particular software, okay, that are more competences.
Thanks, I think that's you. So I'm going to throw open to then Lucy, Vera, or Ioannis. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to add to that? And please just do jump in.
Can I say something to Christie's comments that skills, actually to say that the competencies, the competency framework and the competency methodology in human resource is something that is, we could say the definition that competency is knowledge, skills, and attitudes. So it's not only the skills that is the ability to do something, as Christie said, but is the knowledge that we have from the formal sources, university, on the job training. But the critical thing is the application of knowledge, it's in skills in a work setting. So it's a combination of these three things: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And we could say that the competencies as skills have three categories. It's the technical, the behavioral, and the behavioral can also be distinguished in leadership competencies. We have these three categories here in EUSPA in our competency framework model. Thank you.
And Lucy, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to space skills and what we think, because I know you work very closely in the hiring and skills department.
No, thank you for that. I was thinking, I mean, the definition has now been made quite clear to us, so thank you to Christie and Ioannis for that. But I think there's an added dimension which we can add to this discussion we're having here, and that is the perception. The perception of what skills somebody needs to go into a specific domain. And we're here talking about aerospace domain, and there is the perception outside the aerospace domain that the bar is set very high, and it is true. But sometimes I believe that people think it's set higher than it actually is. And we also know that this is also true for women. And I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is the need to get more people into STEM, not just women. I think it's really important to get women into STEM, but it's very, very important to get everybody, as many people into STEM who are interested. For me, it's a question of knowing what your options are, and as early as possible, so that you make the right decisions that go along with what you want to do. I have no preconceptions. If somebody doesn't want to go into aerospace and really does not want to go into STEM, then they should be supported to do that. But my concern is there are a large number of people who are not fully aware of what it actually means, and therefore discount this as a career option for themselves without really knowing what they could bring to it and what they would get out of it.
Brilliant. I think that's a really important point, that perception point. And actually, we always say it's not rocket science, but some of it isn't rocket science. It's all the other careers and jobs and skills around it. So I want to very briefly touch on the competency framework that Ioannis has mentioned. And just for people in the audience who don't know what competencies framework is or what you use it for, and why it might be useful in the space sector, could you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing at EUSPA with competencies frameworks?
Yes, of course. We have the last 2 years we have started this competency framework project, and what is the main scope of this project is to identify for every different job what is the core competencies needed in order the job holder to perform best in his role. So we have to search all roles, all jobs. We have complete so far the level for the roles, not for jobs. And we are looking for every technical. It was, let's say, the most difficult part because the behavioral is the same for more or less all the jobs in every type of organization. It was difficult to find the right technical competencies, but we had and we still have a very good cooperation with all stakeholders and all the job holders, and we have identified all the technical competencies for the core technical, that is for the engineering jobs and for the operational jobs. And the first thing that we have started to apply this competency framework, we have completed the competency profiles for every role. And for some new vacancies, we have already used these competencies in the vacancy, and the selection procedure is based on these competencies. The next step is to develop a more focused and tailor-made training need analysis for every job family, for every job level. So the outcome will be very beneficial for the management to have this competency gap analysis and diagnosis in order to provide tailor-made training programs. And this is maybe the beneficial for also for the newcomers and the applicants, that it's nice to see what competencies are needed for every specific vacancy, any specific job, in order to make the application or to be prepared for any future aspirations they have based on these competency requirements.
Thank you. I think that provides a really useful kind of idea of why competencies frameworks are useful and kind of what they are as well. And Lucy, I think that there's something that you probably use during hiring process. I know your fantastic webinar last night talking about careers at the European Space Agency mentioned a lot about competencies. So I assume that you use competencies frameworks as well with hiring at the European Space Agency?
Absolutely. We established a behavioral competency framework actually in 2000. We carried out a major reform of the human resources practices at ESA in 2000. And that was when we introduced for the very first time a behavioral competency framework. And that has gone through a number of iterations. And if you look at our vacancies, you can see them there. We now have 6 core competencies. There is more work to be done on the technical competencies. We've just completed a 2-year-long evaluation of all the jobs at ESA with all the technical competencies, and I think there are thousands of them. And it's a competency framework is just not manageable beyond a certain number. So we're in the phase now of consolidating these competencies and really bringing them down to the key ones that we can really relate to. And I think a competency framework is extremely useful because it gives you a structure. It's clear for all parties, so everybody involved, the line managers, the management of the organization, the individuals, whether you are an employee or a candidate. It gives you a structure for your career, and it gives also a structure to know what is expected of you in the selection process.
Brilliant. So it's good to have skills really explicitly laid out to say what we need. So I think I want to go to maybe Vera and Christie next and ask you to, we've got lots of gaps in the space sector and the aerospace sector in terms of skills. And I was wondering from each of your point of view, where the big gaps are for you, what's the kind of pressing skills issue in your mind at the moment? So I'll leave it open to who wants to jump in and start, but I want to throw that out there.
If I may, I just want to picking up your question, and it's something that Lucy said that I really agree about. It's about having more people in STEM. And looking at the recent statistics of Eurostat, they just released a new statistics about scientists and engineer jobs in Europe, and actually 41% are women. So that for me raises another question, because last year we did at EU level a survey to map the space sector, defense industry and aerospace and space sector at diversity level. So that means looking at our workforce and see how diverse it is, not just in a question of gender, but also we are talking about people with disabilities, we are talking about different sexual orientations, etc. And what we realized is actually 20% of our sector, as it was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, it's only women. So if we have 41% of STEM related jobs are women, and in our sector we have 20, and this might be a bit simplistic, but the idea is also to be a bit provocative. So for me, it's not a question of having more people in STEM and in this type of discussion, but more how we can attract this talent and retain it in our sector. And of course, if you look at the results of the survey, you understand a bit why we are not being able to attract and retain, especially women in our sector, is because more than half of the people that replied to the survey, they said it explicitly that they do not see our sector as being welcoming or inclusive. So it is important to work on the skills and upskilling, rescaling, etc. This is extremely important. It's important to have more people in general in STEM, but for me, it's also important that you train the people, they get and they acquire the necessary skills that we are missing in the sector, but then we are also able to have them in working and feeling welcome and feeling that is inclusive. And we do know that diversity has a direct impact in the performance of the companies and of the sector. So this is also links to competitiveness. So this is also very important. And then picking up also in something that I said, we are undergoing in Europe in particular, and I hope that in the world in general, a very important transition related to climate neutrality. So the objective of for Europe is to become climate neutral for 2050. And so we are been working very intensively in a number of changes, not only for the space sector, but to all industry sectors, all Europe, all domains that you can imagine. And you need to have people that are actually able to combine their skills with the necessity that we have for this green transition, as I was mentioning. And I will give you a very concrete example. One of the projects that I'm leading is linked to the green transition of the space sector. So to be able to, the space sector itself, to become more carbon neutral. And this, of course, requires a number of expertise. So we need to have people that know about the space value chain, and at the same time that knows, for example, about calculating the environmental footprint. And last year in one of my projects, I needed to find people with this set of skills. And I can assure you that the number of experts in Europe is extremely reduced. Not only in Europe, but worldwide. So you don't find a lot of people with these two matching skills. So when we at European level, we are putting forward a number of legislation that, for example, becomes mandatory for companies to report on sustainability standards, it is important that the sector not only is able to improve its environmental performance, becoming more and more climate neutral, but it's also important that they are able to measure, they are able to understand and to implement actions. But if you don't have this matching of these skills, type of skills, it's going to be extremely difficult. So for me, in a very short term, this green environmental necessary type of skills and the space value chain knowledge, this match is extremely urgent in our sector.
So I guess for you to summarize, it's that mix of skills and knowledge cross-sector is kind of the gaps we're seeing at the moment. And you picked up on the kind of women and gender minorities point earlier, so I think we'll come back to that afterwards, but I'd like to throw the question out about the skills gaps that are pressing to Christie, I think, next, and then we can have a chat with Lucy and Ioannis too.
Okay. One point I was going to throw out there was so in addition to being an educator, we're also a research institution. So I work a lot in sort of low-end, low TRL research. And one of the gaps we see and experience is the highly specialized skills, and also not really possessing the skills, is possessing the experience. So if I'm a medium enterprise, I need someone who has experience building space propulsion. I can't take a new graduate because they don't have any of the experience. So everybody wants that sort of 5-10 year experience where you pick up, for example, all of the soft complementary skills, but even all of the technical experience skills, not just in theory, but practical. The problem is if you become very highly specialized, you're not needed for the full life cycle of the product. You're needed for that 1 or 2 year period when they design the engine, and then you can go somewhere else. If you're a larger company, you can float a bit to have a permanent R&D population, but it's one of the sectors that relies much more on consultancies. And so universities, other national research, we do contracts consultancies out. A lot of them take consultancies in, but as you go up in career, it's a problem for anyone who, when you stop and have gaps, you have a family, if you need stability, if you can't constantly relocate and move.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating one, that kind of mix of needing experience, needing knowledge, needing crossover between sectors. It's kind of asking for a lot, isn't it? Lucy, I think I'll go to you next. You obviously hire hundreds of people at the European Space Agency each year. Are there any kind of key gaps that you're seeing in people applying to roles at the European Space Agency, or gaps across the sector as a whole?
I think it's more in terms of gaps, in terms of the new competencies that we are looking at. And to help fill that gap, we created a new program, which was launched in 2021, the Junior Professional Program. And we had 30 positions, and the main focus was on some of the new competencies. So typically we're talking about software and security related competencies. Our Director General, when he became Director General, published an Agenda 2025 in March 2021, and there were 5 priorities between now and 2025. And I'm just going to highlight 2 of them. One is to boost green and digital commercialization, and the other one is to develop space for safety and security. And that's where we're finding that there are gaps. So security, definitely cyber security in particular, and coming back to the software related, and then commercialization, which is the ability to turn spin-offs into activities bringing a return on investment, but also new companies. We have business incubators across all the member states where we help startups. But I think what it is important not to forget, we will still need the mechanical engineering, the systems engineering, the spacecraft engineering competencies for the foreseeable future and probably beyond that. I see some very interesting developments. So antenna engineers have been working on foldable antennas, and so there will be new cutting edge technologies coming in these domains, and we will need to keep up to date with that. But we will need to keep what I call the classical skills, and we will still need to recruit in those areas. For the moment, that's not a huge problem. Yes, in some areas we have more difficulty than in others, but we need to maintain this wide base of competencies for the future.
Thank you. I think that's fascinating, so especially that kind of looking forwards and looking ahead of what skills we're going to need. And lastly, before we touch on some other kind of issues I can see popping up in the chat and the questions, Ioannis, can I pass over to you with your mapping of thousands of jobs and seeing hundreds of people come through? Where are the gaps in the space and aerospace sector in terms of skills for you?
Actually, our competency framework is finalized the end of the last year, and we have only for a few vacancies just starting this selection. So there is no any data so far about any gaps about competencies that for some jobs or vacancies, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Well, we'll come back to you in a year's time when you've got more data.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. So I can see a couple of questions popping up in the chat, and it's quite nice because they align with some of the things that we wanted to talk about when we had our kind of pre-panel discussion. And we're very much all aware that we're here for Women in Aerospace events. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about the topic of how to get women into these kind of types of roles, what can be done to attract women, but also non-binary people and other gender minorities. So what can be done to make sure that we've got the right range of skills from different people from all different types of backgrounds? I think I've seen a suggestion in the chat, is it around the use of different language that we use in job adverts and hiring and how we express skills? So I'll throw that open to the panel to see who wants to pick up on it.
If I may, I think that is a very excellent question. Indeed, language in the vacancy notice, for example, is one possible way to solve it. But again, we need to think about attracting and retaining. So even if you have vacancy notices that are gender neutral language and that are and showcase the openness and inclusivity of the workplace itself needs also to be inclusive, and that is sometimes where it lays the problem. And coming back again to the survey we did last year, we also question employers about the measures related to diversity and inclusion that they have in the companies. And for our surprise, we actually found out that 76% of the companies do not handle discrimination complaints when they are filed. So again, it's not surprising that the staff working there, actually the workforce declares that the sector is not welcoming and neither inclusive. So yes, it is important to have measures like the language. I remember an example that was shared with me last year at the EUSPA week of a company that in its vacancy notice, for example, includes, even if you don't fill all the criteria, please, but you think that you can do the job, just come. Because sometimes you do not have a very specific skill, but you do have transferable skills. You have a set that you learn working in something else, but that knowledge that you acquire, that ability, that competency can be transferred and applied to the space sector and to the work that you will be doing. For example, if you are good in doing team managers, for example, teamwork or leadership skills, that is transferable to whatever sector you work. So it is important also to give that openness to the candidates or possible candidates. It's also about not looking for candidates always in the same place. So if your dog barks always at the same tree, it will always get the same results. So you need also to go a bit out of the box where you are looking for recruiting people. And you need to be open also that if they have a baseline of transferable skills or more broader skills, to provide them also in-house training for specificities of the work that they will need to perform. And then on top of that, again, it's extremely important to retain the talent. And part of retaining the talent means having a true inclusive policy in place in the company and give space and freedom for everyone to feel safe and secure in the workspace, and to give them also the opportunity to, propose new ideas, have different views. And otherwise, we end up again with the dog barking always at the same tree, right? We will always do the same thing in the same way. And sometimes the fact that you have diversity in your workforce also helps to have different perspectives toward the same issue and the same problem, the same product. And this will also allow the company to be more innovative. And sometimes it's about breaking these stereotypes that we think that we need to have, people in a suit being a manager. If it is a manager, he needs to be wearing a suit all the time. If he wears jeans and a t-shirt, he's not able to do the job. We need to break this type of stereotypes that comes from, I don't know, ages ago, and leave space for this creativity to foster also. And that will also help to retain the talent. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Really, really good insights there. Can I put out to others? Again, just to reiterate the question, it was how can we better encourage skilled people, make sure we're not losing a diverse pool of talent. Christie, I just saw your hands. I think I'll go to you.
Yeah, mine was just so in universities, there's a sort of different way. In other words, we're responsible for recruiting like our PhD students or our researchers, postdocs, for example. So we have HR that do the more formal recruitments. This is actually probably a question back to Lucy, but because then I have to hire all of my own staff, I actually see quite a lot of, after a while, resumes, CVs, etc. And to me, the diversity option comes in terms of, as long as the opportunities exist, right? The opportunities, the job, the training, okay, is almost agnostic of who's applying for them. The diversity element is either retaining, so developing a culture and workplace that you want to stay and work in, or in trying to interpret how you attract them. And so it's on both how you advertise the position, but also how you advertise yourself and how you write your CV. And one of the things, especially when you're have difficult things like you're switching sectors, okay, is we started doing more targeted CVs where we attach it to the competencies framework. And so if you can build in examples of this is, how do you say no project management skills? How do I evaluate that? How do you prove that you do? Because everybody lists it on their CV. So can you give me examples of what the core competencies are? Can you make examples that demonstrate sort of not the really obvious as in my education, but all of those other kind of skills? And there, I think it's a chance and an opportunity also to bring in, I didn't work in space, but I did these projects where I led, I did this experience where I managed, I did this example of doing that kind of stuff. So to be honest, it's really a skill in how you properly market it. And it's a skill from companies to more broadly interpret what they're actually looking for. But I was just wondering, because I'm not an HR specialist, but I presume they're much better at this thing.
And I think that's also really important to think about, that kind of being quite clear about what you're asking for, and kind of that retention point again keeps popping up. I think that's really important. Lucy, Ioannis, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add to how do we attract diverse talent with the right skills as well.
If I could just jump in, I think there's a number of issues here, and it's quite a complex subject to discuss. It's, as Christie said, it's about promoting, so yourself, but also promoting the organization, because it's one thing to have an idea about an organization and then you read the vacancies and yes, there's a lot of work done on our vacancies, but we accept that there's also a lot of room for improvement, and really making it appeal to all sectors, to all types of people from diverse backgrounds. But again, there's also something very basic, and I think that if people are thinking of applying or making a career change, I think it would be really good to get some advice. And I think CV writing, a motivation letter writing, or whatever at the very early stage is also really useful, because sometimes you forget to highlight things in the right way. You might be able to analyze more or less what a company is looking for. You're not in the shoes of the recruiting manager, so you will never know that exactly until you start going through the process. But the first step is so important with the CV and the motivation letter, so that you really catch the attention and explain why you want the job and what you can bring to it. And I think that Christie and Vera are absolutely right about the transferable skills. It's really important to put yourself in the shoes of the recruiting manager and say, what would I need to know in order to recruit me if I was that recruiting manager?
I really like that question of, yes, how if I was in their shoes, how would I swear I can speak English sometimes, but I think that's a really, really nice way of thinking about how you kind of turn it around and think about skills from a different angle and think about recruiting from that point of view. Ioannis, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that,
Yes.
attracting diverse talent.
Yes, just to comment on Christie's saying that is a matching that has two sides, what is offering, so the vacancy, and what is from the applicant side. So both sides has to do the best. I mean, the vacancy should be focused on the right audience. It will be demonstrated what exactly is this specific job. So all the competencies, the right level should be there. Sorry. And also from the applicant side, should be very good matching. I mean, this too is the critical issue. How can we have the perfect match? That is not always very easy. That I mean, here in EUSPA, we are trying to make our vacancies as more possible visible in many channels. And we are trying now with the competency framework to have a better selection procedure.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'll just open the floor if there's any other comments that people want to make there.
I had one. So on the topic of hiring, because it's also a risk from an employer point of view. So pragmatically, it's very difficult to fire people, and takes a while by the time you hire them, integrate them into the company and stuff. So it's a big risk if you're not quite sure how they're going to fit on both sides. So I think that's one of the reasons why people would be conservative when they hire, or even consciously hire from universities, like from backgrounds, because you have a better confidence, and I can't afford to hire somebody, have 1 year in, and then replace them. So we were looking at hiring practices. One of the interesting ones is companies like, say, McKinsey. Some of the larger consultancies have or Google, if you want to be famous, but you hire. So when you apply for a job, it's kind of an open job. It's a 6-month process, and you're given problems to solve on weekly and monthly base. You're paired with a mentor from the company, from within the company, that evaluates you over this 6 months, and you work with them, and they observe how you work to solve this problem. And at the end of the 6 months, I think there's 2 kind of steps of interviews. You present your solution, and then they do a lot of rapid fire questions. And yes, it takes a while, and they're hiring not to fill a specific individual position, but to have bulk people that can do sort of consultancy things. But I liked the idea that it's a little more of an exchange, rather than in 30 minutes, you somehow have to convince me, and in 30 minutes, I somehow have to be convinced by the company, because you're just making guesses, and very risky guesses for both sides. I was just wondering how different hiring practices, what is that middle ground of, if I only have a month, how do I hire somebody?
I don't know if anyone wants to come back on some of those points. I think that's an interesting one about how you find the right person too, from an employer's point of view, or whether we kind of think about it and mull over it. And I'm going to assume we may want to mull over it, I think, because I think it's a really kind of key point to think about as well. So I'm going to move to a couple of audience questions, but also combine a few because I can see quite a few coming through. I think the one that I want to, or ones I want to pick up on at the moment, are around kind of the international aspect of space and aerospace, as well as the language points. There's a couple of questions here around how do you see international collaboration playing a role in upskilling the future workforce? And also, how important are language skills for working in space and aerospace? So I know it's kind of combining that international point. So I'll let you decide on what you want to talk about, but it's that international aspect. How can we use that for upskilling and reskilling for space and aerospace? I will throw it open, see who wants to grab the question first.
I'll give it a go.
Obviously, you're bold.
Oh, sorry.
We've done at the same time, Christie.
Mine was easy. I was just going to say it's communication over language. But the thing about language is if you're communicating your third language or second language, you're less confident. So it's more be confident and be ability to communicate, even if it means trying to look for, like Heidi and I, who apparently can't speak English either today, looking for words.
Well, I just wanted to say something quite similar, actually. It's all about communication. I think the international cooperation and the language skills, it is all about communication. I've seen a dramatic change over my career in the uptake of English. Okay, my experience is primarily based in Europe, of course, and with a focus on Europe. But although we cooperate with the space agencies outside Europe as well, but I've seen such an uptake in English language skills. So gone are the days when our young graduate trainee program was launched, which was launched about 40 years ago, when I used to have to be calling up mothers who only spoke Italian to find out if their son or daughter was coming for an interview the next day. The candidates would regularly leave their luggage spread all over Holland in various places because they hadn't realized they might have to get to the airport in a tight time frame and they'd not traveled before. It's very different. I mean, this is an amusing little bit of nostalgia, if you like, but it's very, very different now. I would say that English is the lingua franca of the European aerospace industry. Although there are exceptions. For instance, if you work in the launcher sector, there's a very strong French influence there. So French is very helpful in that domain. So that's the main thing about language skills and the international cooperation. That is something that I personally particularly like about working in an international organization. How that has an impact on the skills update or upgrading is also a challenge. I think more it's along the lines of being ambassadors and trying to do as much outreach across the sector and beyond as is possible, because I'm a great believer, and it's coming back to what I said earlier on about making sure that people are fully aware of all their options. And I really believe that this needs to be started as young as possible and by as many players in the sector as possible. And I hear too many scary stories about families discouraging people from a career in a specific domain. And I personally believe that that's not the right way to go.
Thank you. I think that raises an important point that was also highlighted in another question about how do we get young people involved and not put them off as parents or teachers. Ioannis, Vera, I don't know if you want to respond to the international point or whether you'd like to touch on a little bit of that kind of teacher-parent influence as well.
Maybe on the international aspects, just to add something, and picking up a bit on the EUSPA program itself that we manage at the Commission with the help of EUSPA and ESA. And one of the activities that we have is precisely linked to the downstream. So the use of space data and services for the development of applications, not only in Europe, but also outside Europe. So for example, in Latin America, we do have what we call Galileo Reference Center, so EUSPA Center. So we have the EU Global Action, Space Global Action. So we do have a number of initiatives internationally. Of course, it is true what Lucy and I agree that English is the lingua franca, the franca language in space. So when I go for meetings outside Europe, usually it's English that we speak. But when you're trying to sell something or to have something in a local market, you need to speak the language. So this means that if you are applying for a position, that applies that you will link to Brazil. Of course, it's important that you're on top of English, you know Portuguese also, because otherwise, how are you going to communicate? Lucy and I saw some comments in the chat about communication. Indeed, communication and being able to communicate is extremely important. And it's a skill that you can acquire. So nobody is born speaking. So you learn how to speak, you learn how to communicate, you learn about interpersonal relationships, you learn about empathy. And this is not that you are born with it or not, you can train. Even for public speaking, you can have trainings. In these days, you have a lot of actually very good TED Talks available on YouTube, for example, that is a good way to start in how you communicate. But of course, you need to master the language that you are going to communicate to a minimum so that you can be understood, of course. And especially to know that if I use this word, I'm not insulting this. And picking up again, for example, on the Portuguese, there's words that in Portuguese from Portugal are fine, but if you use them in Brazil, you're insulting people. So there's also not only the language and the communication aspect, but also the cultural aspect that is important to know. And again, this is something that you learn. You learn because you visit the country, you learn because you follow a bit what is happening, you talk with native people from that country or people that are living in that country. And these days with internet, it's easy for you to be at your home in your sofa and actually interacting with people from the other side of the world and learning a bit more how they interact. The same thing, for example, if you go to Asia, the level on how you interact with those people or those countries or those companies is completely different from what you do here, right? So it is important also to have this aspect. So when you are applying for a vacancy, it's important also to understand with whom you're going to work with, and this necessary basic skills that is not sector specific, is not rocket science, but it's still about human connection that you will need to establish with your co-workers, plus your customers that you might be working with.
I think there's some really good points, and it makes me feel slightly guilty about being British with one spoken language and being utterly useless at that. So I will get back on the Duolingo. Ioannis, I don't know if you've got any points that you want to add before we move to another couple of questions.
Just to say something that about how the new people can start their career. Here in EUSPA, we have many trainees and many staff that have started from trainees. And I think it's a very nice experience for just a graduate to start as a trainee, because he or she can see the job in the real settings. You can see all the career path that he has in his personal aspiration. And this, I think it's always best to have something in practice. So it's the best way for a newcomer to start as a graduate, as a trainee. And we have many trainees here, and many staff have started as trainees. So I think it's a successive procedure.
I think I would absolutely agree with that. So I'm going to move to a couple more questions in the last 10 minutes. I'm aware there are so many really good ones coming through, so thank you for submitting them. I'm going to go for one from Kathy here, which is really about, I guess it's focusing on some of the solutions and activities and skills initiatives that are currently going on across space and aerospace at the moment. So can any of the panelists comment on some of the initiatives or areas that we think aren't being filled at the moment, and what's really missing that we really should be doing? What's important for us to focus on? So who wants to go first? It sounds like a good one. Otherwise I will pick Christie, I think. Go on then.
I was actually going to say any of the other ones, just because I know that Europe and a lot of the major agencies and a lot of the Commission are running a huge amount of studies that are ongoing on analyzing everything about skills, from looking at it from a stakeholder point of view, from the individual, from the workforce, from any kind of training providers, the different types of training that's offered, whether it's formative from like universities and traditional training, whether it's how do you do that kind of lifelong learning, training in the middle of the career, how do you better integrate training into your career, how do you as a workforce integrate all of those kind of stuff, mobility, diversity aspects. So I would probably vault it to the much larger programs rather than the same thing that's being mirrored at individual company levels.
No, brilliant. And I'll pass on to Lucy next. Just to reiterate, it's that what gaps, what skills initiatives aren't being addressed at the moment, what's missing?
That's a very good question, and I'm not entirely sure what is missing, because we can pick out so many gaps. There's so much going on. I think that where Christie was making a point as well was we need to start pulling everything together, and then we can start analysing where the gaps are. I mean, one of the things that ESA has been doing, which is very dear to my heart, is the European Space Education Research Office. And it's to support the primary and secondary education community in Europe. And it was launched in 2005. Now, it's not a gap, but it is to meet a gap. And I think that what we build on in later stages, what universities do, but I do think the institutions and the agencies have a role to play in this. This is something for the European Commission, the European Union, and the European agencies to take the lead on and identify the gaps and ways to fill them. But at the moment, from my perspective, personally, there is an awful lot going on.
Good to hear there's lots going on, but I absolutely agree on that joined up thinking. This is something that I think we all need to do better at. Vera, Ioannis, I don't know if you want to add anything to those points.
It is true that it is putting everything together is important. And a few years ago, we started with a project that was, again, based more on downstream sector of space, so space downstream. That was the Aero for Geo initiative that tried precisely to do this mapping and identify what were the gaps and how we could fill it in. And actually, the large-scale skills partnership for the space sector dedicated to data services and applications that I just mentioned there was born from this project, actually. So it was everyone that was involved in that project initially that came forward and said, no, we want to continue to work. We want to continue to give this opportunity. We want to continue to fill this skill gap and to provide the necessary trainings and opportunities to make this bridge. I might be repeating myself, and this is also because I work with the green and digital transition of the space sector, and so this for us is very important, that the space sector itself at large, so not only the downstream but also the upstream, are ready for what is coming there, because otherwise we might end in a moment that, because of the legal obligations that company will need to be fulfilling related to climate transition, for example, that they don't have the know-how to do that. So we are now currently looking at this particular issue and trying to identify exactly, what is missing, what are the gaps, how we can promote to fill these gaps for the green and digital transition. Also, what Lucy mentioned before, the security aspect. So if you look at the EUSPA strategy for security defense that is 1 month ago that we released it, this is also a point that is included there, the skills, because indeed is the area security and defense is becoming more and more important. Cybersecurity, for example, that was the concrete example that Lucy gave. We share that concern. We do have there a huge skills gap, and EUSPA in Prague, that is the one managing, for example, the security aspects of the EUSpace program. I suppose that Ioannis agree with me that hiring people with the necessary security skills, it's difficult. So the green part and and the security aspects of skills. I think that is a very important gap that we need to fill in our sector. And again, it's a question of doing the matchmaking. So it doesn't mean that it needs a mandatory to be a person that from scratch is expert in space and security. Most likely is a person that is expert in security, but he has transferable skills and knowledge that can be applied to space. The same thing for green. And this implies also some on-job training and some period to ramp up until the person is working and full autonomous for 100%. And I do think for past experience that I have related to these topics in space-related events, that we also had this type of discussion with industry and academia, that we are all aware that it might be very difficult to find a candidate that fulfills all the needs that we have skills-wise, so that we will need to hire someone and provide in-job training. And I think that the companies and the sector is aware that this is how it needs to be done. Nobody arrives to a company and knows immediately how everything works and all the processes. So this also has a learning period. A bit what Christie was saying, that you have 6 months with a mentor, you learn, you identify the gaps, you identify the problems, and then you have a plan to solve it. This is actually a very good idea, and this would allow to attract more people also to our sector. But then I come back again to my other point, that is, you attract them, you train them, you need to retain them also. So this is also very important.
Brilliant. It definitely sounds like that skills gap issue is also a retention gap issue. I think we'll have to come back to discussion at another point. But Ioannis, I want to give you a chance. What for you are the gaps in the skills landscape at the moment for space and aerospace?
Do you mean the gaps based on our experience as
either based on experience or the programs that you're seeing? What are we not doing that we should be doing?
Just to confirm on Vera's comment that many jobs in EUSPA is on security, cyber security. So it's true that it's very difficult to find the right person. We have many vacancies on security. About the gaps, it's very difficult to say how can we fill this gap, but an idea that just came in my mind, maybe we could have a cooperation, all the EU agencies and the institutions, we could cooperate to have a survey or a study about the gaps in the space industry, and we can agree on a common plan or just to identify some areas of development, some areas of a better feeling. I think it will be nice to have a cooperation, not only from from the Brussels or maybe from EUSPA, ESA, but from the whole space sector.
Brilliant, thank you. I think the themes that are really coming through today are that collaboration, that retention point, that I guess if you're applying for roles, looking at it from the hiring point of view, but if you're hiring, trying to make sure you're looking at it from the applicant's point of view as well. So I think there's some really, really fascinating points that have come up, and thank you all so much for all of your thoughts and your time. Thank you to the audience, because there's been so many questions. I can see 20 that we couldn't even get to answering. So what we'll try and do is take some of these questions and write a bit of an article to kind of feedback for you on some of these points here. Just because it's 1 o'clock now and I'm aware you'll be having to drop off your next meetings, we do have a couple of other sessions coming up tomorrow in the Women in Aerospace Symposium. So the next one is tomorrow morning. If you want an early morning workshop about burnout and how to cope with it, that is at 9 a.m. European time or 8 o'clock in the morning if you're in the UK. And then in the afternoon, we've got a lunchtime session with the Padawans outreach program, who are run by SJC, funded by the Barbie Bursary through Women in Aerospace Europe, and they're going to be talking about their outreach to girls in STEM. So I'm going to wrap up there and say a huge thank you to everyone, to Ioannis, to Vera, to Lucy and Christie. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really great talking to you, and we will close it there, but hopefully see you at another Women in Aerospace session soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.